Before I get more into details of the targets I've taken out or the horrors I've gone through, it might be appropriate to not only introduce myself, but also say how I got into this whole business. Realistically, all I am allowed to share is my name is Jackson. Most other things regarding personal identity are classified. A while before I got into this mess, I was just about as forgettable as a crumb that fell from your mouth while you're eating one night. I worked a dead-end job, had little relation with coworkers, or anyone for that matter, and no living family. I was essentially a loner. I kept to myself and had no one to care for, or anyone that cared about me. Taking this into account, I can understand while I was an appealing target to the organization, there was no risk in taking me, as no one would notice I was gone. One particularly cold night, while I was walking home from work, I decided to take a bit of a shortcut home because the cool wind kept biting at my fingertips. I began to cut through an alley, but as I pressed on, I noticed a feeling of dread wash all over me, almost as if I was being watched from the shadows. It was so damn cold. I ignored the feeling in my gut and kept walking. I regret doing so. Looking back now, I felt a blunt force strike to the back of my head, and I fell to the ground with ease. And although my consciousness was fleeting, I could make out a few faint grunts as I was hoisted into the air. Back then, I could remember the feeling of exasperation and wonder I felt when I woke up. The room I woke up in was like the white room straight out of the Matrix. And although I felt a feeling of nostalgia creep over me from the movie, the terrifying feeling of the unknown overpowered it. Yes, it was cool to be in a blank white room. However, the feeling of emptiness tied with it, not so much. I remember a door opened out of what seemed like thin air, and a man entered wearing all black. He introduced himself as nothing other than Ace. He began to give me what was like a debriefing at the time. He gave me the choice to either be returned to my life of solitude and misanthropic idiosyncrasy, or I could undergo training and in turn have an opportunity to work for them. I wasn't told what the opportunity contained, but anything seemed better than the life I was currently living, so I accepted. Over the next few months, I went under intense training. The first month was nothing but running. Sun up until sundown, I ran and ran and ran. I can say for certain that it never got any easier. Each day was harder than the last, despite me eventually growing into extremely good shape. The following night was filled with constant puking and unruly pain. During this time, I got little sleep, as the nights were filled with strength training and building muscle, along with occasional nights off. The next months were essentially the same thing, but at a much more endurable level, as I was also tasked with honing my skills in a wide assortment of weapons. I trained in weapons from literally ancient history to most modern rifles and equipment in play. After 6 brutal months of training, I was proficient in most weapons that were used for combat. After one night, I awoke in that same white room yet again, with Ace standing, not but 2 feet away. "You passed through your training with flying colors," he said with a blank face. I decided to remain silent. To listen but not speak was a quality I'd retained through my former life. "I respect your resolve, Jackson," he had said with that still face. "You are now ready to become the 6th hunter. There will be dead drop locations placed around not only the US, but the world, detailing your targets. From here on out, you will be monitored, but contact with us will be severed. You will once again be alone, but we both know that that is what you prefer anyway." I proceeded to nod to show I understood. I was given further debriefing before I was sent to the armory and chose my weapons I would use throughout my journey. I was not too much of a fan of the new experimental weapons, so I decided to pick up an M4 carbine, as well as a Glock pistol, a combat knife, and a VSS. Fast forward a bit closer to the present day. I reached my first dead drop location, some dumpster in an abandoned diner on the edge of some town. My target was 1405 Walker, and the target was profiled as extremely dangerous. At the time, I had no idea what Walker had meant to imply until I actually witnessed what the creature was. I had tracked it down for weeks, using nothing but tracks and a faint scent that I was able to pick up. There was always various tufts and colors of hair containing different textures, but they all had that same scent. When finally I had reached a cove, deep in the forested regions of Oregon. On the northern shore of the cove, there was a small alcove, which led into a larger cave system. The smell I had tracked from weeks radiated from the alcove. As I began to get closer, the stench turned putrid and began to burn my nostrils. I quickly threw on a gas mask to try and avert it. I pushed further into the cave system. Bones littered left and right, scratch marks in the cavern walls, and a bone-chilling, chattering noise that echoed from deep in the cave. That same chatter turned into grunting, to howling, to purring, and various other noises that could be emitted from an animal. I started to understand what the creature was. Relating the name on the contract, it was a Skinwalker. A brutal, shape-shifting monster, keen on being relentless with its prey and providing no mercy. I kept pressing on into the depths of the cave, when suddenly a boulder crashed down behind me, sealing me from going back the way I came. A giggle echoed from not too far away, and this being my first contract, I nearly had crawled up and cried. Nearly. I nutted up and went down into the cave with my VSS drawn. I caught a glimpse of movement as I saw some sort of long, hairy appendage retracting from the corner. I slowly crept around the stone floor into the corner as not to alert the creature. I peeked around the aforementioned corner and saw a large clearing in the cave. Webs littered the ground, along with different sorts of teeth and piles of fur. Bones littered the walls, even more densely, as if they were a fixture. I was in the den. The creature, taking a form of a giant scorpion, emerged out of one side of the clearing, scuttling towards the center as if it was readying for my attack. I took aim and fired. The bullet measly deflected off the chitin, and the creature turned towards me. I quickly unloaded the other 19 rounds in the magazine, each seemingly more pitiful than the last. It began to charge me. I panicked and tried to pull out my sidearm, but by the time I did, its stinger quickly pushed towards me and stabbed me. I was knocked out. I awoke, covered in a sticky mess of webbing, my head pounding like no other. I could barely see through a slit in the webs that I was hung upside down in the corner of the cave. I could see the creature in what I could only assume to be its normal form. It seemed like a mess of bones, with a thin layer of flesh barely covering what lay underneath. Its face was nothing other than a long skull, like that of a deer, but oddly longer and much more unnatural. It didn't seem to notice I was awake. I wiggled back and forth, allowing my loose knife to cut through the webbing with ease. Eventually, it was enough to free one of my arms, which then allowed me to cut the rest free. I fell face first onto the cave floor below. A sharp pain shot through my wrist, and I knew it was broken. I quickly stood up to see the creature pummeling towards me in the form of an arachnid. I ducked underneath its fangs, and then was able to slide further as it kept running over me. I pulled out my Glock and unloaded the full clip into it, to no effect. However, it did seem to piss it off. It lunged at me again, this time pinning me to the ground with two of its legs. I was stuck. Its abdomen moved downwards towards me. A stinger emerged, dripping some sort of liquid. I, underneath the weight of the monster, was able to draw my knife from my pants. I slowly reached up to an unguarded part of the arachnid and plunged the knife into its skin. It shredded and began to back off. I quickly stood up, the adrenaline making me unaware of the pain in my wrist, and stabbed at the same spot again and again and again, until the creature fell over, writhing, pulsating and flickering between its normal form and several others, before it shriveled into a clump of dust on the ground beneath my feet. I grabbed what supplies I had dropped and began to make my way out of the cave, crawling through crevices in order to find my way back to the surface. That story is all I have time for now. It feels good and less of a burden to have at least shared this story with some people. Whether or not any of you will even care, I have to go now. Another contract awaits.